Every crime is a wound on the world. We're here to dissect it, layer by layer, to find the truth buried within. This is Anatomy of Crime. The air in Oklahoma City on the morning of Wednesday, April 19, 1995, was cool and clear, carrying the clean scent of a Midwestern spring after an overnight rain. It was a morning brimming with the quiet promise of the ordinary. Across the city, in neat suburban homes and downtown apartments, alarm clocks had buzzed, coffee was brewing, and the gentle, familiar rhythms of life were unfolding. A young mother, new to the city, was likely feeling a pang of anxiety as she dropped her toddler off at the America's Kids Daycare for the first time, whispering reassurances before heading to her own job. A decorated Vietnam veteran, perhaps, was driving in from a rural town for a long-awaited appointment at the Veterans Affairs office on the first floor. An ATF agent, briefcase in hand, was probably grabbing a coffee, mentally preparing for a day of sifting through firearms trace reports. It was a morning like any other. The Alfred P. Mora Federal Building, standing at 200 NW 5th Street, was the epicenter of this daily routine. It was an unassuming structure of precast concrete panels and glass, a 9-story, testament to the brutalist architectural style of the 1970s. It wasn't beautiful, but it was significant. To the people of Oklahoma, it was a place of public service, a one-stop shop for the machinery of government. Its floors housed the regional offices of nearly 20 different federal agencies: Social Security, Housing and Urban Development, the Secret Service, the Drug Enforcement Administration. It was a place where citizens interacted with their government in the most mundane of ways, applying for benefits, seeking loans, getting help. By 9 o'clock, the building was humming with purpose, a hive of nearly 500 federal employees and dozens of civilian visitors. Inside the America's Kids Daycare on the second floor, 21 children were starting their day. Some were infants, sleeping soundly in their cribs, while toddlers played with blocks on a colorful rug under the watchful eyes of their caregivers. On the floors above, federal employees were settling in at their desks, logging onto their computers, the day's first tasks laid out before them. They were secretaries and law enforcement agents, computer technicians and credit union tellers. They were ordinary people, beginning an ordinary day in a building that represented the mundane, functional presence of their government. Outside, across the street, an old American elm, later to be known as the survivor tree, stood as a silent witness to the morning traffic, its new spring leaves rustling in the breeze. At 9:01, a nondescript yellow Ryder rental truck, 20 feet long, pulled into the 3-minute drop-off zone at the building's north face. Its driver, a tall, clean-cut man with a military bearing, stepped out, locked the door, and walked away with a brisk, determined stride. At 9:02, the world was torn apart. The heart of the truck was a bomb of monstrous and sophisticated power, an alchemical mixture of nearly 5,000 pounds of ammonium nitrate fertilizer and nitromethane racing fuel. When it detonated, it unleashed a cataclysm. An overpressure blast wave, a wall of compressed air traveling at over 10,000 feet per second, slammed into the building's reinforced concrete support columns. These columns, the very bones of the structure, were instantly pulverized. The north face of the building, from the ground to the roof, disintegrated. All 9 floors, their support gone, collapsed in on themselves in a horrifying, pancaking cascade of concrete, steel, and glass. The blast wave radiated outwards, a physical manifestation of pure, unadulterated hate. It left a crater 30 feet wide and 8 feet deep in the asphalt. It shattered windows in 258 nearby buildings. some over 3 miles away. The sound was a deafening physical blow, a concussive roar that was felt as much as it was heard, a sound that instantly became the dividing line between before and after, and then, for a horrible, an unnatural quiet, punctuated only by the sound of groaning metal and the whisper of falling dust that turned the brilliant spring sky into a sickly gray-brown shroud. This was not a foreign attack plotted in a distant land. This was not a tragic accident born of negligence. This was a message, written in debris and death, delivered with cold, calculating precision to the very heart of the American heartland. It was an act so deliberate, so devastating, it seemed to defy comprehension. How could a place of such ordinary life become a scene of such extraordinary death? How does a man, a decorated American soldier, who once pledged to defend his country, come to declare war on it? Today, on Anatomy of Crime, we dissect the anatomy of domestic terrorism. We will trace the path of Timothy James McVeigh, from the battlefields of the Persian Gulf to the backroads of the American Midwest, to understand the precise and terrible calculus that led to the deadliest act of homegrown terror in the nation's history. We will examine the ideological ecosystem that created him, the forensic miracle that solved the case, the intricate legal battle that defined its public narrative, and the chilling legacy that continues to echo in the fault lines of a divided America. This is the story of how the enemy wasn't at the gates, but was already inside, a product of the very nation he sought to destroy. In the moments following the explosion, there was only a stunned, surreal chaos. The initial shockwave gave way to a rain of debris and the sound of 1,000 car alarms shrieking in unison. From the hollowed-out carcass of the Mora building, a thick column of black smoke began to rise. First responders, their own station houses shaken by the blast, raced toward the smoke, navigating streets that were now a treacherous carpet of shattered glass. What they found was a vision of hell. The building was a grotesque skeleton of twisted rebar and dangling concrete slabs. Floors had compressed onto one another, creating a treacherous, unstable tomb that had trapped hundreds of people inside. The initial response was a testament to human instinct in the face of inhumanity. Doctors, nurses, and ordinary citizens ran toward the danger, not away from it. They formed human chains, passing chunks of debris away from the wreckage. They used their bare hands to dig for survivors, calling out into the void, listening for any response. The stories of heroism from that day are countless. A nurse named Rebecca Anderson rushed from her home to the site to tend to the wounded. While helping, she was struck by a piece of falling debris and later died, becoming the 168th and final victim of the bombing. Urban search and rescue teams from across the country descended on the city, bringing with them specialized equipment and trained dogs. For days, they worked in perilous conditions, navigating the unstable structure they nicknamed the Monster, risking their own lives with every step. The human cost was staggering. 168 people were killed. Over 600 were injured. The victims represented a cross-section of America. There was Captain Mickey Maroney of the Secret Service, who had been in his office on the 9th floor. There was Lakeisha Levy, a 21-year-old airman first class who was in the Social Security office. There was Dana and Anthony Cooper, two brothers, aged 24 and 2, who had come to the building with their mother. The blast tore through the America's Kids Daycare, killing 19 children and 5 adults. The image of firefighter Chris Fields cradling the limp, dust-covered body of 1-year-old Bailey Allman became a heartbreaking symbol of innocence lost, a pietà for a nation in mourning. As the nation watched in horror, The question burned. Who did this? The immediate assumption, colored by the 1993 World Trade Center bombing, pointed overseas. Prominent terrorism experts went on national television and confidently declared it the work of Middle Eastern extremists. This speculation had real-world consequences. A Jordanian-American man was pulled off a flight in London and held for questioning, his only crime being that he had been in Oklahoma City that day. The narrative was set. This was an act of foreign aggression. But as the FBI and ATF began the painstaking process of sifting through the rubble, the evidence began to tell a different story. The science of the crime scene was speaking, and it wasn't speaking with a foreign accent. Investigators established a massive perimeter, treating an area of over 300 square blocks as a crime scene. Every piece of debris was a potential clue. They found microscopic traces of ammonium nitrate and nitromethane, the chemical signatures of a massive fertilizer bomb. Then came the break. Buried in the tons of mangled steel and pulverized concrete, a searcher found a single critical piece of evidence: the rear axle of a truck, miraculously thrown clear of the main crater. It was twisted and blackened, but stamped onto that axle was a vehicle identification number, a VIN. It was the needle in a city-sized haystack, the forensic Rosetta Stone that would unlock the entire case. The number was traced to a 20-foot Ryder truck rented from a small business, Elliott's Body Shop, in Junction City, Kansas. A team of FBI agents descended on the town. The owner, Eldon Elliott, remembered the men who had rented the truck 2 days earlier. The primary renter was a clean-cut, military-looking man who used a fake South Dakota driver's license under the name Robert Kling. Working with a forensic artist, Elliott and his employees produced a composite drawing. They also described a second man who had been with him, a suspect who would become known to the world only as John Doe No. 2. The sketches were broadcast on every television station in the country. The federal government offered a multi-million-dollar reward. The largest criminal investigation in American history, codenamed OKBOMB, was now in full motion, and it wasn't pointing toward the Middle East. It was pointing toward the American Midwest. The answer to who did this began not in some distant, war-torn land, but in Pendleton, New York, a small town near Buffalo, where Timothy James McVeigh was born in 1968. By most accounts, his childhood was unremarkable, almost stereotypically suburban. But beneath the surface there were signs of a growing detachment. He was a quiet, lanky kid, considered intelligent but socially awkward, who preferred solitude to group activities. He was bullied in school, an experience that likely reinforced his sense of being an outsider. His parents divorced when he was a teenager, an event that friends said affected him deeply. His primary relationship was with his grandfather, who introduced him to firearms. This introduction blossomed into an all-consuming obsession. For McVeigh, guns were not just a hobby. They were the foundation of a worldview centered on self-reliance and a deep suspicion of authority. He read Soldier of Fortune magazine, devoured survivalist manuals, and became convinced that a Soviet invasion was imminent. He built a bunker in the woods and practiced living off the land, preparing for a societal collapse that he saw as inevitable. After a series of dead-end jobs, including a stint as an armored car guard, McVeigh found his calling. In 1988, he enlisted in the U.S. Army. Here, for the first time, his obsessive discipline and firearms expertise found a home. He was a model soldier, consistently scoring top marks in physical fitness and marksmanship. He excelled as a gunner on a Bradley fighting vehicle, a role that perfectly suited his detached, technical precision. It was in the military that he met two men who would become central figures in his life and in his crime: Terry Nichols, a slightly older, disgruntled soldier who shared his burgeoning anti-government views, and Michael Fortier, a more easygoing follower who was drawn to McVeigh's intense charisma and unwavering confidence. McVeigh's military career culminated in the Persian Gulf War. Serving with the 1st Infantry Division, he saw combat and performed with distinction. As a Bradley gunner, he was credited with killing Iraqi soldiers, acts he later described with a chilling lack of emotion, calling one long-distance shot the greatest shot of my life. His unit participated in the infamous Turkey Shoot on the Highway of Death, an experience that likely desensitized him to the concept of mass casualties. He was awarded the Bronze Star for his service. He was a decorated American hero. But this success masked a growing disillusionment. His ambition was to join the elite Green Berets, the Army's special forces. He entered the grueling selection program, but washed out after just 2 days, a physical and psychological failure that friends said crushed his spirit. This rejection from the Army's inner sanctum seemed to sour him on the very institution that had given him purpose. After the war, he felt profoundly adrift. The discipline and purpose of the military were gone, replaced by the mundane reality. He returned to a country he felt no longer respected its soldiers, and a government he was beginning to see not as a protector, but as a tyrannical oppressor. His quiet resentment began to curdle into a dangerous, all-consuming rage. This transformation from decorated soldier to domestic terrorist was not sudden. It was a gradual radicalization, a slow poisoning of the mind, fueled by a specific set of beliefs and real-world events that he interpreted through an increasingly paranoid and violent lens. After leaving the Army, McVeigh began to drift, traveling the country in his car, working odd jobs at gun shows. This gun show circuit was his university of radicalization. Here, in convention halls across the country, he found a community that shared and amplified his paranoia. He was exposed to a torrent of anti-government propaganda, conspiracy theories about a new world order, and literature from white supremacist and militia groups. The foundational text for his new worldview was a book he bought at one of these shows, a cheaply printed, virulently racist and anti-Semitic novel called The Turner Diaries, written in 1978 by William Luther Pierce, the leader of the neo-Nazi National Alliance. The book is a fictional diary of a man named Earl Turner, who joins a violent underground group called the Organization. This group wages a brutal race war against what it calls the system, its term for the U.S. federal government, which it depicts as being controlled by a Jewish conspiracy. The novel is a chillingly detailed blueprint for insurrection, filled with descriptions of assassinations, sabotage, and guerrilla warfare. But for McVeigh, one passage stood out. It described the organization's first major act of terror: loading a truck with a homemade fertilizer bomb and detonating it in the parking garage of the FBI headquarters in Washington, D.C., an act meant to awaken the public and spark a revolution. For Timothy McVeigh, The Turner Diaries was not fiction. It was a manual, a prophecy. He sold copies at gun shows, gave it to friends, and quoted it as scripture. The book gave him a narrative for his anger, a framework that cast the U.S. government as an evil, oppressive force, and righteous, bloody violence as the only logical response. With this ideological filter in place, two real-world events became the catalysts that solidified his resolve and set him on his murderous path. The first was the 1992 siege at Ruby Ridge, Idaho. federal agents engaged in an 11-day standoff with the family of Randy Weaver, a white separatist, over a minor firearms charge. The siege resulted in the deaths of a U.S. Marshal, Weaver's 14-year-old son, Samuel, and his unarmed wife, Vicky, who was shot by an FBI sniper while holding her infant daughter. To McVeigh and many in the patriot movement, Ruby Ridge was proof positive of the government's willingness to use deadly force against its own citizens, particularly those who dared to defy its authority. The second and far more significant event was the Waco siege in 1993. For 51 days, federal agents from the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms and the FBI surrounded the compound of the Branch Davidians, a religious sect led by David Koresh, over suspected firearms violations. The standoff began with a botched ATF raid that resulted in the deaths of 4 agents and 6 Davidians. It ended in a fiery tragedy on April 19, 1993, when the FBI launched a tear gas assault meant to force the occupants out. A fire broke out and engulfed the flimsy wooden compound, killing 76 people, including more than 20 children. McVeigh was not just a passive observer of these events. He traveled to Waco during the siege to witness it for himself. He sold bumper stickers and talked to protesters, absorbing the atmosphere of anti-government fury. He saw the tanks, the federal agents, and what he believed was a government laying siege to its own people. When the compound burned to the ground, he was enraged. He, like many others in the movement, rejected the official explanation that the Davidians had started the fire themselves. He believed it was mass murder, a deliberate act of state-sponsored tyranny. The date, April 19th, became seared into his mind. It was a day of reckoning, a day the government needed to be punished. He decided he would be the one to deliver that punishment. The second anniversary of the Waco fire would be his day of vengeance. By late 1994, McVeigh's abstract rage began to coalesce into a concrete plan. He reconnected with his old Army buddies, Terry Nichols and Michael Fortier, pulling them into his dark orbit. Nichols, who was older and shared McVeigh's deep-seated distrust of the government, became an active participant, a man struggling with failed businesses and a sovereign citizen ideology that led him to try to renounce his U.S. citizenship. Nichols found a sense of purpose in McVeigh's righteous anger. He would become the quartermaster of the operation. Michael Fortier, on the other hand, was more of a follower. Adrift after the Army and using drugs, he was captivated by McVeigh's intense personality. He listened to the plans, offered some minor assistance, but was never as committed as McVeigh or Nichols. He was the weak link, the man whose conscience would eventually break. The plan itself was a direct echo of the Turner Diaries. The target would be a federal building. The weapon would be a massive truck bomb. To fund their operation, McVeigh and Nichols committed an armed robbery in November 1994, stealing guns, precious metals, and cash valued at over $60,000 from a firearms dealer in Arkansas. With this money, they began assembling the components of their weapon. In the fall of 1994, using the alias Mike Havens, Nichols purchased 40 50-pound bags of ammonium nitrate fertilizer from a farm co-op in McPherson, Kansas. A month later, he bought another 40 bags. They paid in cash. They stored the 2 tons of material in a series of rental lockers. The final critical ingredient was nitromethane, a high-octane racing fuel. McVeigh, a fan of drag racing, knew that when mixed with the fertilizer, it would create an enormously powerful explosive, far more stable and potent than a traditional dynamite bomb. He and Nichols purchased 3 55-gallon drums of the fuel from a track in Texas. As the chosen date, April 19, 1995, drew closer, the pace quickened. McVeigh visited Michael Fortier in Arizona, laying out the entire plan. He used soup cans on a table to show Fortier how he would arrange the barrels in the truck to create a shaped charge, focusing the blast to inflict maximum structural damage. Fortier would later testify that he tried to talk McVeigh out of it, but McVeigh was resolute. This was his mission. On April 15th, McVeigh checked into the Dreamland Motel in Junction City, Kansas. The next day, he met up with Nichols. Together, they drove to Geary Lake State Park, a remote area where they began mixing their deadly concoction. On April 17th, 2 days before the attack, McVeigh went to Elliott's body shop and rented the 20-foot Ryder truck. He drove it back to the lake, where he and Nichols painstakingly loaded 50 plastic barrels filled with their explosive mixture into the cargo bay. McVeigh, drawing on his demolitions knowledge, prepared 2 separate, redundant fusing systems to ensure detonation. The bomb weighed approximately 4 as a getaway car. McVeigh had previously parked his own vehicle, a beat-up 1977 Mercury Marquis, in an alley in downtown Oklahoma City. The plan was simple and precise. Park the truck, light the fuses, walk to the alley, and drive away. On the morning of April 19, 1995, Timothy McVeigh woke before dawn. He wore a T-shirt emblazoned with the motto of Virginia, Sic Semper Tyrannis, thus always to tyrants. The words John Wilkes Booth shouted after assassinating Lincoln. On the back was a quote from Thomas Jefferson, "The tree of liberty must be refreshed from time to time with the blood of patriots and tyrants." He got behind the wheel of the Ryder truck, now a rolling weapon of mass destruction, and began the 3-hour drive south to Oklahoma City. He was calm, focused, filled with a sense of historic purpose. He saw himself not as a terrorist, but as a patriot, a soldier in a new American Revolution, about to fire the first shot. He arrived in downtown Oklahoma City shortly before 9 a.m. He drove past the Mora building once, then circled back. He pulled the truck into the drop-off zone directly in front of the building's glass facade. He lit the 5-minute primary fuse, then the 2-minute backup. He locked the truck, dropped the keys, and began walking briskly, but not running, toward the alley where his getaway car was. He later explained that he considered the people inside the building, including the children, to be collateral damage. They were, in his cold calculus, no different from the faceless enemy soldiers he had killed in Iraq. At 9:02 a.m., as he was a few blocks away, the bomb detonated. The force of the blast was so great it nearly knocked him off his feet. McVeigh got into his Mercury Marquis and merged into traffic, heading north on Interstate 35, away from the devastation. For a moment, it seemed like a perfect getaway. But then came a simple, almost banal twist of fate. About 75 miles north of Oklahoma City, near the town of Perry, Oklahoma State Trooper Charlie Hanger noticed the aging Mercury. It had no license plate. Hanger was a veteran officer, and something about the car felt wrong. He pulled it over. When he approached the driver's side, he saw the bulge of a Glock pistol under McVeigh's jacket. McVeigh informed the trooper that he was armed. Trooper Hanger calmly disarmed him and placed him under arrest for carrying a concealed weapon and driving without a license plate. At 10:20 a.m., just 80 minutes after committing the worst mass murder on American soil to that date, Timothy McVeigh was sitting in the back of a police car on his way to the county jail in Perry, Oklahoma, for a routine traffic violation. He had no idea the world was looking for him, and the authorities had no idea who they. While McVeigh sat in jail, the OKBOMB investigation was moving at lightning speed. By Thursday, April 20th, The FBI had traced the truck to Elliott's body shop. The composite sketches of Robert Kling and John Doe #2 inches were plastered on every news broadcast. At the Dreamland Motel in Junction City, manager Lee McGowan recognized the sketch of Kling. She knew him as the man who had stayed in room 25, a guest registered under his real name, Tim McVeigh. She contacted the authorities. The FBI now had a name. They ran a check and discovered McVeigh's address in Harrington, Kansas, at the home of Terry Nichols. They also discovered something far more urgent. A criminal background check revealed that a Timothy McVeigh had been arrested the previous day and was currently being held in the Noble County Jail in Perry, Oklahoma. A frantic realization swept through the FBI command center. Their prime suspect was in a small-town jail, and he was scheduled to be released on bail at any moment. Federal agents raced to Perry, arriving just as McVeigh was being led from his cell for his bond hearing. The manhunt that had captivated the world was over. The primary culprit had been caught, not by a brilliant piece of detective work, but by a vigilant state trooper and a missing license plate. With McVeigh in custody, the rest of the conspiracy quickly unraveled. Agents descended on the home of Terry Nichols. Nichols, seeing the news and realizing the net was closing, surrendered. A search of his home uncovered a trove of incriminating evidence: fertilizer residue, blasting caps, and anti-government literature. The third conspirator, Michael Fortier, was tracked down in Kingman, Arizona. Faced with the mountain of evidence and the prospect of the death penalty, Fortier agreed to cooperate. He became the government's star witness, the insider who could place Timothy McVeigh at the very center of the plot, detailing his motives, his plans, and his utter lack of remorse. The nationwide hunt for John Doe #2 inches continued for months, but ultimately went nowhere. The FBI concluded that the witness had likely been mistaken, and that the conspiracy consisted of just McVeigh, Nichols, and Fortier. Due to the intense emotional climate in Oklahoma, the trial of Timothy McVeigh was moved to Denver, Colorado. The prosecution team, led by Joseph Hartzler, built an overwhelming and meticulous case. They presented a mountain of forensic evidence, from the chemical traces on McVeigh's clothing to the VIN on the truck axle. They had receipts for the fertilizer and the racing fuel. And at the heart of their case was the damning testimony of Michael and Lori Fortier, who described McVeigh's chilling confession and his detailed plans for the attack. McVeigh's defense, led by Stephen Jones, attempted to create reasonable doubt by floating theories of a wider conspiracy, suggesting McVeigh was a pawn for a shadowy group of international terrorists or domestic extremists. But they could not overcome the sheer weight of the evidence. Throughout the trial, McVeigh remained a cold, unnerving presence. He listened to the heart-wrenching testimony of survivors and the family members of victims with an unnerving detachment. He showed no flicker of remorse. On June 2, 1997, the jury Terry Nichols was tried separately and convicted of conspiracy and involuntary manslaughter, receiving a sentence of life in prison without parole. The state of Oklahoma later convicted him on 161 counts of murder, adding 161 consecutive life terms. Michael Fortier, for his testimony, was sentenced to 12 years and was released into witness protection in 2006. On June 11, 2001, at the federal penitentiary in Terre Haute, Indiana, Timothy McVeigh was executed by lethal injection. He declined a final verbal statement, but submitted a copy of the poem Invictus, with its defiant final lines: "I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul." He died as he had lived, with an absolute certainty in the righteousness of his cause. In the years since, the case has remained settled in the eyes of the law, but threads of controversy persist. The identity of John Doe #2" remains a fixation for conspiracy theorists. While the FBI officially concluded he was a red herring, some authors and independent investigators have continued to pursue leads, pointing to alleged connections between McVeigh and wider extremist networks. To date, no credible evidence has ever emerged to substantiate these claims or to implicate anyone other than McVeigh and Nichols in the core plot. Terry Nichols remains incarcerated at the ADX Florence Supermax prison in Colorado, where he has occasionally given interviews, maintaining a degree of responsibility but continuing to blame McVeigh as the primary instigator. Michael Fortier served his time and disappeared into the anonymity of the Witness Protection Program. The legacy of the bombing is deep and multifaceted. It led directly to the passage of the Anti-Terrorism and Effective Death Penalty Act of 1996, which streamlined the process for capital punishment and expanded federal law enforcement powers. It fundamentally changed architectural standards for federal buildings, leading to the now commonplace use of security bollards, shatter-resistant glass, and vehicle-free buffer zones. But its most profound impact was on the American psyche. The bombing forced the nation to confront the reality that the most potent threats could come not from foreign adversaries, but from its own citizens. It pulled back the curtain on a subculture of anti-government extremism that had been festering in the shadows. In the decades since, particularly with the rise of the Internet and the recent surge in domestic political violence, the ideologies that animated Timothy McVeigh have not disappeared. They have evolved and found new audiences. The Oklahoma City bombing stands as a chilling historical landmark, a foundational event in the story of modern American domestic terrorism. Its lessons on radicalization and political violence more relevant than ever. The site where the Mora building once stood is now a memorial. Its 168 empty chairs, a silent testament to the void each victim left behind. The survivor tree still stands, a symbol of resilience, but also a permanent witness to a day when a former soldier, wrapped in the flag of his own ideology, declared war on his own people. The crater Timothy McVeigh left in the heart of the heartland was not just in the ground, it was a wound in the nation's sense of self, a stark and enduring reminder that the most destructive storms are sometimes the ones that gather from within. This has been Anatomy of Crime, where the truth is never simple, but always worth seeking.